Sikyong, Penpa, what's going on today in Tibet. I mean, Genocide Convention never accepted the idea of cultural genocide. His Holiness said that China was committing cultural genocide against Tibet. He said that 15 years ago, and since then it's only gotten worse. If you would just reflect on that, about what China is doing.
The Chinese government likes to call Tibet a socialist paradise. And I don't know of any paradise where people self-immolate themselves. In the last, from 2009 till about 3 years ago, 157 Tibetans have self-immolated, burned themselves to death. In Czech Republic, you had one incident in 1968. And in Vietnam, you had one incident in 1963. In Tibet, 157 Tibetans, mostly young Tibetans who are between the age of 17 to 35, who have never witnessed independent Tibet, who have never witnessed cultural revolution, those 10 years of destruction where they destroyed more than 6,000 Tibetan monasteries, and 1.2 million Tibetans died as a direct or indirect result of China's occupation of Tibet. That speaks for itself. These younger generations see what Chinese government is doing to Tibet and the Tibetan people today. And that is what drives them to this desperate act. So when we talk about these desperate acts, then we are talking about all the ills that we are facing. In terms of political space, there is none whatsoever. It's more like George Orwell's 1984 coming into reality, where the state surveils everything. Today, if I think about self-immolating myself, then I have to think about all my family members. I cannot think only about myself. It's not like Tibetans cannot kill Chinese. They can, but they don't do it because His Holiness always said that if you take up violence, I will no more be responsible for the cost. So Tibetans also restrain themselves from taking up violence. You talked about the colonial-style boarding schools. That's aimed at eradicating, changing one generation of Tibetan into completely Chinese. So you have to learn Communist Party thought, you have to learn Xi Jinping thought, you have to practice loyalty to the party, and all these things are happening in Tibet. And in addition to what was reported by the UN Special Rapporteurs on the colonial-style boarding schools, since 2018 they started closing all the schools, private schools, not just in Tibet, but also in southern Mongolia, in Uyghur, and in Tibet. Lately, in the last 6 months, we have been witnessing more cases of Chinese government closing down monastic schools. And that is where they learn Tibetan and Tibetan Buddhism.
The purpose is to destroy minority cultures. Is it to destroy a people?
Unfortunately, China is the only country that is moving towards uniculturalism, whereas the whole world is moving towards multiculturalism at the expense of all other nationalities, whether it be Tibetans or Uyghurs or Mongols.
Well, you know, the United States has recognized what the Chinese are doing to the Uyghurs formally as genocide because of forced sterilization. They're trying to destroy the people in that way. Raphael Lemkin, who was the author of the Genocide Convention, wanted cultural genocide to be included in the convention, but he didn't have a consensus. But there are clauses, as I said before, that could be interpreted. And should there be a campaign now to expose what China is doing?
As the elected political leader, I travel around the world. I've traveled to more than 35 different countries speaking about these things. So we are continuing to advocate for the Tibetan suffering inside Tibet. I don't know whether the public here knows about the middle way policy that His Holiness has.
I want to get to that.
Yeah. His Holiness has adopted since 1973. When I say 1973, you should also know what was happening inside Tibet. From 66 to 76, there was this 10 years of cultural revolution where they were destroying everything old. And the real threat was the existential threat to the Tibetans, whether Tibetans would remain Tibetans or would there be Tibetanness in Tibet. So since that time, His Holiness always appreciates the concept of European Union. If it is not for the concept of European Union, Europeans would still be fighting with each other. So if that can be applied to Europe, then why not Tibet with China? Whether we like it or not, we cannot lift Tibet out of that place and put it somewhere in the Pacific or Atlantic. So we lived as neighbors for centuries, and we lived in peace. with China. We have not done nothing wrong to the Chinese people. When the Mongols invaded China, Mongols were killing Chinese people, and our lamas stopped Mongolians from killing Chinese people. We have done nothing wrong against the Chinese, but we are suffering this fate under communist China.